Hey there, and welcome to Large Format Friday. I'm your host, Matt Marrash. If this is the first time you're stopping by the channel, there's a playlist of our entire third season of LFF. If you haven't subscribed yet, each and every Friday we're going to be here and we're going to be chatting about something large format. You know, the beauty and simplicity of the large format camera introduces its own unique challenges, mainly that all the work is on us, the photographer. There's nothing automated going on in the background. This process can be a little daunting at first. Here's 3 things that I've used the entire time I've been doing large format photography that I think are really helpful rules of thumb. Large format rule of thumb, number 1. The front standard controls focus, the rear standard controls shape. So when you're working with a large format camera, you've got 2 standards. You have your front standard up here, which holds the lens, and you have your rear standard back here, which houses your ground glass and eventually your film when you go to shoot. When we make changes to the front standard of our camera, we're actually changing where the circle of light is projecting from our lens. This includes our rise and fall, our left and right shifts, our tilts, and our swings. Now, when we do that with the front standard, this is only changing where that circle of light is being thrown. We're taking a 3-dimensional world and projecting a 2-dimensional slice onto our glass. So that means any movements we do with the front standard are only going to change where our focus lies. It's either a perfect 2D slice that matches the glass, or it intersects the glass at an angle and we get a sliver of focus, also known as that tilt shift effect that we've seen. When we move to the rear standard, focus can also shift when we start changing the direction of the film plane, but that's also pushing the film closer to the lens or further away from it. This also has an effect on the shape of the image. This can remove keystoning from any large format compositions that involve buildings or parallel lines. And if there's a person involved, well, we can enlarge heads, shrink heads. So just watch out for body parts when you start applying tilt and swings. And that's why we say the front standard changes focus, the rear standard changes shape. Large format rule of thumb number 2, focus to the far, tilt swing to the near. Now, this is a large format rule of thumb I've followed since day 1, so let's break that down. Focus to the far. That means take your lens and focus on the furthest subject matter you want in sharp focus. This could be infinity or it could be in front of infinity. It's up to you. The reason we start with our focus to the far is so we don't have to do as much back and forth focus shifting. We're still going to have to, but this is going to minimize it and lessen some of the confusion once we start applying swings and tilts. When I start swinging or tilting the standards of my large format camera, I'm actually changing how far the light has to travel, which will in turn change focus on the front or the rear standard. Now, as we just learned, the rear standard will also change shape, but both standards will change focus when we start applying these movements. Once we have our far focus established, next it's time to start applying movements. Another little trick when you're focusing to the far, tilt swinging to the near, if you're doing those movements with the front standard, you're going to want to move that front standard towards that forward subject. If I'm applying these movements on the rear standard, I'm actually going to back the camera back away from it. The reason being, those rays of light are not corrected by any sort of mirror in here. There's just a bellows. Where my face is, this is normally a bellows. There's nothing that's correcting the rays of light that are traveling from this lens, meaning the bottom is at the top and the top is now at the bottom. That's why we apply the opposing movement on the rear standard. Now, from that first large format rule of thumb, when we do apply those rear standard movements, watch out for changing shape. This can work to your advantage or disadvantage depending on what you're going for in the image. So just be careful with those rear standard movements. My first large format camera did not have any tilt or swing on the front standard, and I applied rear movements and everything was just fine. Large format rule of thumb number 3, expose for the shadows and develop for the highlights. Now, this large format rule of thumb applies specifically to negative films, so that's black and white and C41 negative films. If you're working with transparency or slide film, this rule isn't exactly going to apply the same. So, exposing for the shadows. Film has a very specific sensitivity range at which it's going to start responding to the light that you give it. If you give it too little light, you're going to have an underexposed film, and no amount of overdeveloping is going to get you a suitable looking negative. But if you give your film just the right amount of exposure, and then based on what you're metering in the scene, that can give you the right tools to develop your film properly to get that contrast range where you need it. You see, the shadows on your large format film will develop out relatively quickly, but the longer your developing time proceeds, the higher that density is going to get, increasing the contrast of your negative. This is why you'll often see large format photographers in the field with a compact little spot meter like this. This allows me to measure a specific area, usually the shadow area that I want my deepest detail. I'll place that in a specific zone, and that's going to tell me how I need to expose my film to give enough information to develop out my shadows evenly. What I'll also do with this spot meter is find where my highlight values go. If I have a very contrasty scene, this may inform me that I need to underdevelop my film. Or if I have a normal contrast range of about 5 to 6 stops, I won't do anything different to my film. Or if I have a very flat, low contrast scene, I will apply a more aggressive or extended development time. This is also the same thing as pushing and pulling film. This is also why when you push or pull your film, you're going to alter the contrast. So remember, expose for the shadows and develop for the highlights. So those are my 3 large format rules of thumb. If there's any out there that you'd like to share, be sure to let me know down below in the comments. Today's Large Format Friday is brought to you by our LFF sustaining members. It's thanks to folks like you that are continuing to support the channel on a monthly basis, and it helps keep the lights on and experimenting with all sorts of things. So you might have noticed that last week I didn't have a full LFF, but I tried something new with these new YouTube shorts. I don't intend on stopping those anytime soon, but they're not going to replace Large Format Friday. In fact, it's going to be more like a supplement. So sometime in the middle of the week, you may see an upload show up that's less than a minute long and vertical. That's a YouTube short. They don't go out on the notifications bell, so if you do subscribe, you can hit the bell and you're not going to be bombarded with all sorts of shorts. But be sure to check those out on the channel. There's going to be a YouTube Shorts playlist on my main channel page to check those out. If you want to learn more about the large format photographic process, be sure to get subscribed. And for any of those long form questions, you can shoot me an email, largeformatquestions@gmail.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we'll catch you next week for more LFF.